I think with that, we'll get started. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Rich. Rich Fann works at the University of Pittsburgh, but he's also an acclaimed, internationally acclaimed writer about combat sports. He is an American football coach, and he has recently taken up a role mentoring graduates from historically Black colleges in America. And sometimes he finds the time to sleep. So please join me in welcoming Rich for his talk about the importance of Black representation spreading out beyond Black History Month. Rich?
Good morning, Will, and thank you for that or good afternoon, I guess, for you all in the United Kingdom. My name is Rich Fann, he, him pronouns. I serve as the Associate Director in the Office of Cross-Culture and Leadership Development. It's my pleasure and privilege to speak to you all today about Black History Month across the Atlantic here. And so the first thing I want to do is talk about the picture I have up. This young man was at our National Panhellenic Council plot dedication. And so to begin my talk and the idea of representation and how to make Black History Month something that just isn't a month, but it's an actual guideline, a principle, something that you're doing outside of the approved section that we all have as academics and staff and faculty. So this young man was here at the plot dedication in the United States. I know we do the whole fraternity and sorority life, the Greek lettered social organizations in a way that maybe that hasn't translated. I know a lot of times when I was a career consultant, when folks went to Europe from the United States, it was a hard explanation as far as what happens in the world of Greek life, quote unquote. And so at Pitt, at homecoming this past September, we had a plot, which is 9 areas dedicated to our Divine Nine, our first and only 9 historically Black fraternities and sororities. And they were created at a time when Black men and women weren't allowed to join fraternities in the collegiate environment. So you already had to deal with the idea of segregation. You finally make it into college. You want to join one of these organizations, and you're told because of the color of your skin, you can't. And so these 9 organizations, starting with the Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, led the way for inclusion in terms of in that regard. And having this at what we call a primarily white institution is such a groundbreaking thing, particularly in Western Pennsylvania, because my vice provost, a Black man who belongs to the Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated within the Divine Nine, got to talk during the dedication about the the blue, gold, and black moments at the University of Pittsburgh. Because for representation purposes, there really were folks who donated to this plot who said their experience, even as so far as the 90s, early 2000s as graduates, was so detrimental to them that they would never set foot on the university's campus. Some even so far back as the 70s that said they would never come back. And they not only came back, they donated money for this plot to occur. And so when Kenyon, our vice provost, said that this was home, welcome home, it really got me thinking, because Will had invited me to come out here about that idea of representation. Because when Black students, when Black staff, when Black faculty see this plot, they now have, through the spending of the university, the fundraising of alumni and donors, and the will of the student body that asked for this about 12 years ago, and it finally came to fruition this year, a culmination of everything I want to talk about today. And so thank you all for having me here. And I'm going to jump around a little bit I'm going to leave this picture up, but I'm going to jump around a little bit, and I have my notes here off to the side. So forgive me if I have to look outside of the camera's purview. I'm a big person, I'm sure some of you are too, in higher education, on acronyms. And I'm also a huge, as Will was very kind. I'm big into combat sports. I work at the Pro Wrestling Torch. I have worked at some other places, Buffalo News, et cetera, cover American football. I coach American football. One of the things I've learned as a coach, one of the things I've learned as a staff member and teacher, is that acronyms are kind of my cheat. And so for me, I'm an acronym fan, and I'm also a big nerd. So I'm going to start with the idea for today's talk of LARP, which in the United States is live action role play. When I was a resident assistant at the University of Pittsburgh, I had a student that came from Buffalo, New York, and he wore no shoes the entirety of the time I knew him at Pitt. And one of the things he felt was a little ostracized because people would make fun of him because of that. And so he tried to find his own fit at Pitt. And this was a white gentleman. So as we were talking, he mentioned that he was interested in live action role play. I had no idea what that was. I've played role playing games. I'd heard of Dungeons and Dragons, never actually played because I didn't have enough people that knew it to teach me to play, etc. But he explained that they would go into these public spaces and dress as their characters. And at the time, I think it was Vampire the Masquerade. And so trying to be a good resident assistant. And for those who don't know, resident assistant, you may have a corollary there at Wolverhampton, live-in student that in exchange for room and board is a mentor and a resource for students. And so as the RA and trying to do a good job, I said, hey, let me go with you. And so I went and I wore what I thought a vampire would wear in Pittsburgh for this role-playing game. And lo and behold, as we're, acting through this, a police officer comes through. And everyone else, I'm the only Black person there. Everyone else is fine, but I froze. And in my head, I'm thinking, am I going to get arrested? What's going on? And the reason I thought that was, as soon as he saw us, the very first thing the pit officer said was, are you guys supposed to be here? And so once that happened, that set off a string of alarm bells in my head that maybe I should have rethought us having this LARP in this building, which apparently was closed, but this was 1999, 2000. They somehow left the door open. And so we were just there in Wesley Posvar Hall, walking around being dumb. And long story short, nothing happened. But in that experience, he learned from me some of the experiences that maybe have been different from him. And in that, we bonded and grew. And so that's what I'm hoping also today we do through my silly stories, through my acronyms, and through some of the scholarly works I'm going to refer to. Hopefully this is a growing opportunity, not only for experiences I will talk to you here in the United States, but particularly here in Pittsburgh, particularly more so in the University of Pittsburgh, that you can maybe take with you at Wolverhampton and elsewhere. But that's my goal. And so the first part of that is logistics. And so I mentioned in the story about the plot, we had buy-in from my vice provost. We had buy-in. The chancellor showed up and spoke and said, welcome home. You have the university paying. And I would refer at the end, I'm happy to share with you any of my work, not necessarily personal work, but the research I've done for this presentation today. If you ever look at Caleb Briscoe, he uses Hurtado, who is another luminary in higher education in terms of research, the idea of the multi-contextual model for diverse learning environments. And so really this breaks down into the biggest kernel I want to start with. Individual development is impacted by interactions racially and no different from staff or faculty. So before you start thinking about students, before you start thinking of the buy-in from above, think about yourself, think about your BAME colleagues and coworkers and how they have buy-in. And if they don't have buy-in, figure out why. Because sometimes I can guarantee, and research backs it up, it's because of burnout. Not everyone is comfortable being the person that has to speak in that space all the time. And particularly in higher education, not everyone is going to be equipped to present things. Not everyone's going to be equipped to put a program on. For me, I've had 15 years of working in higher education where I've built the confidence to do things like this. If you had asked me back when I was a junior as a resident assistant that I would be giving presentations on representation and the importance of it, I don't think I would believe you. But it was through the experiences of meeting people, through the experiences of mentors pushing me that I'm even able to do this today. So keep that in mind with some of your young colleagues or older, they may just be in a point where they're either not yet ready or burned out. And think about from the logistical standpoint as well, what institutional barriers are there? Not every school is going to be comfortable having a presentation like this, and not every school is going to be comfortable having the opportunity for folks to ask tough questions. Later on, I'm going to talk about a situation we currently have at the University of Pittsburgh where our Black, Asian, and LGBTQIA students have all written letters to the institution and demanded certain things, and how we've responded to those demands in order to be a more inclusive university. Additionally, you want to make sure that as you're going through this, this is no different than the students, like I said before, to the staff. If you want to make sure that there's buy-in, you have to make sure that you're including them. One of the easiest ways to do that, I work in my office, and diversity, equity, and inclusion is a part of the cornerstone of our office, but we have a staff member, Shardina Harper, who I'd love for you all to meet at some point. And I think for some of the folks who were at my chat last year, got a chance to attend programs and talk and meet Shardina, and it was really cool. I think she is the example of having your experts be the experts, because she's been in this business for, decades. She does work not only in the university, but outside of the university to make sure representation is at the forefront. And she advocates for our students in a way that is not only aspirational, but is something that she can maintain. What I mean by that is, again, having that opportunity to push yourself back and not only think about the logistics of dollar cents, buy in, what are the obstacles you got to kind of get around as an institution, but also for those people that you do find that are the rock stars, the people you find that are really good at what they do. How do you make sure that they feel supported to the point that they don't either fall out of love or lose that passion, or feel so unsupported, feel so in the void, so to speak, that then they don't get a chance to continue to spread their wings and experiment and do the things they need to do to be good at what they do. And I know Will said the questions will be at the end. I'm always happy to just, throw them in. I can't really see them right now, but if there's something in the moment as I'm talking, please throw it in there. I'm going to try to stay on track because I know I only have about 45 minutes. So I want to make sure I'm a good steward with that time. And so we've talked about a lot of the logistics, and for us at Pitt, even creating that MPHC plot, that took, like I said, 10 years, 12 years. It took several instances of the Black Student Union pushing for it, particularly our MPHC, National Panhellenic Council. And it took, again, that money. Not too many primarily white institutions will give upwards of $50,000 US to start it and then let the fundraising finish it. A lot of times it would be in reverse. You raise a certain point, and if we get there, we get there. We had a couple of colleagues, I believe University of Virginia. There was another school I looked at in my research when we were thinking about the plots where, the fundraising was given to a certain point, and then it was just paused until such time as the money was given. And that wasn't really Kenyon's goal. Dean Bonner, Dr. Bonner, his goal was to make sure this was done. And then anything came in was buttressing what we had poured into it. And I thought that was an amazing decision by him and leadership, and being able to articulate for him, what does the blue and gold and black moments mean, and how important they were to share. At the university, for instance, we had Pennsylvania Hall, which I was the resident director of, which I'm sure with you at university, sometimes you just have a very straightforward, I don't know a corollary for Wolverhampton, but Pennsylvania Hall is as boring as one can get as far as a name. It's very straightforward. It's kind of a placeholder until such time that you have someone who's paid a lot of money to put their name on a building. In our case, we didn't do that. We dedicated it to Dean Irvis, a gentleman who was one of the pioneers in medicine that was a Black man. And so that moment, putting that there, is something that is astonishing, because now you have students can learn about the history of that person, and the university eschewed the donation for the opportunity to make the quote unquote right choice, in my opinion. And so those little things, again, those are big things, but they're little things to students to see it and have now in your nomenclature Irvis Hall instead of Pennsylvania Hall. And then think about, why is it Irvis Hall? Just like when, most universities across the country is starting to reckon with the historical relevancy of the names on their buildings. Were they involved in things that were untoward? We have Omicron Delta Kappa at the University of Pittsburgh, which is an honorary. And it was founded for the ideals of several presidents and then Jefferson Davis. And I spoke there as their advisor. And it was when I first got to my job, that was one of my positions. And I stood up and I said, the man whose ideals paint this picture would not want me here. And the fact that we exist and persist despite that is a testament to the ability of change and the ability of growth, and the inability for ignorance to win in totality. And so when you think about that, that also leads into my second letter, A, articulation. How are you communicating these programs? How are you communicating what you're trying to do? If a student body, if your staff and faculty don't feel like these representative moments are occurring because you haven't spread the word, where are the failures? As we were starting, Will was joking with some of his colleagues about his connectedness. And I think that's what you need. You need those touch-tone people to be able to get the word out, not only to amongst the students, which is absolutely the number one goal, but also to the staff and faculty who may feel alien, may feel ostracized, may feel like there hasn't been a moment yet for them to see what the university is putting behind in terms of, I know it's October, I know it's Black History Month, what else are we doing outside? Because when you start playing, and I see that a lot when we cover professional wrestling, when you start playing the idea of let's have the month and honor the people in the month, and then we move on to another month and honor the people in the month, without thinking about making it the DNA of your organization, you run the risk of being seen as pantomime and putting yourself in a position where there doesn't feel to be anything real from your student body. They just feel like, okay, it's October, we're going to do this. It's September, we're going to do this. You know, we just finished here in the United States from September 15th to October 15th is Latinx and Hispanic Heritage Month. And I serve on the committee that creates a lot of the programming. And we created these masks. I'm gonna make sure the camera gets it. Somos Pit, which is we are Pit in Spanish. And we gave them out. And one of the things we worked through as a university was, you know, a lot of times with you see there, Pitt Student Affairs, a lot of times Pitt, in terms of our copyright, the words go under it. However, in this case, they made a dispensation to allow for, in Spanish, it to make sense. And that, again, little thing, big thing. If by making this, you're telling a student, particularly a Latinx student or a student that speaks Spanish, that your language means more than this whole thing. Because if you're saying we are Pitt, and I can't say we are Pitt in my native language, are we Pitt? And so think about those. How are we articulating? Is it with these little things? Is it with the big things? And one of the articulated points I wanted to bring up was, as I mentioned, we had, especially during the more lockdown portion of the pandemic, the student bodies of our Black, Asian, and LGBTQIA student bodies present letters to our university demanding changes. With our Black students, one of the biggest foci were providing support for Black graduation, providing opportunities for seeing staff that are hired to get it to at least 7 to 10% of the hired staff and faculty, particularly on the academic side, being Black, or in your case, BAME candidates, working with the idea of support for first-generation students. And as a first-generation student to college, I think that resonated well with me, mainly because as you go through this journey, if you don't see folks who look like you that can kind of guide you along the way, it gets a little murky, and you try to find it. But when you have them there, it makes it so much easier for retention purposes, for support purposes, and in particular, specifically because of the pandemic, mental health purposes, having counselors and having clinicians on hand that were more representative of your student body to allow folks who may feel uncomfortable asking questions outside of certain company to do so. And so same thing with our Asian students. When there was an uprising in anti-Asian violence and discrimination during here in the United States, and with our LGBTQIA students as well, they had separate letters, and we tried to do the same thing. But the key was articulation, being transparent. Now we're doing programming where staff and faculty are doing bias trainings 5 times a year to make sure that the blind spots that are sometimes happening, something, again, little thing, big thing. Something as simple as not calling someone by their dead name after they've transitioned, or the registrar holding on to that name as their registered name rather than making the transition as the legal documentation is changing. Those are both institutional barriers, opportunities for growth, ways to articulate, but you have to articulate it in a way where it isn't the pat on the back. It isn't the look at what we did. It's we've heard you, we're listening, here's how we're acting. Now, like I said, with the R representation, we're talking about the student demands. One of the other things that came up was the idea of the affordability of college, providing aid access. And I think our systems are a little different in that regard. I know it's a lot more expensive here in the United States than perhaps University of Wolverhampton, the United Kingdom in general. And so I know that's going to be tough. And so for us, finding affordability, finding opportunities to bring in a more representative student body also means we have to invest in those students so that they can persist and make it to graduation and not only survive but thrive. And that is because there's participation. My final letter. And so are the students in the groups, and that's really one of the bigger overarching questions. Do you have students in some of these meetings that can kind of help guide you as to, does this seem like it'll be well received by the student body? Will my peers see this as a clear sign of you trying to make the next move? Or will they see it as you just chasing clout and seeming to check that off? We've got the BAME students off of our backs. Let's move on. Do you have fun with it? And I want to get to, before I hold up for questions, I want to kind of like stand up a little bit, show you my shirt. For those of you who have seen Low Key series, that's the TVA shirt. Someone made it offline, so Disney may hunt me down at some point, in which case tell my wife and son I love them. Support Black-owned businesses. And so that was something that I had gotten, and some of my players had seen, and they'd liked on my American football team. And so I got a few, and it was just a fun thing. And that's another thing. Don't just always make it about the trauma and the siphoning from the pain of the BAME experience and using that as your starting point for discussion. I think having fun with it, having discussions. One of the things we just did because students wanted to do it was our Rainbow Alliance, which is composed of all of our LGBTQIA students, wanted to do showings. And so we're working on getting them showings of The Owl House, which is a Disney cartoon series, which has been very representative in that their main character is a bi woman, and they have non-binary characters as well as gender fluid characters. And so that sort of show, you would think a bunch of 18 to 21-year-olds wouldn't want to watch, but they're sitting down and enjoying because they're saying, when I was little, I didn't have this. And so it's enjoyable to see this. Just like with our Black Action Society, our primarily Black student organization. They're watching Insecure seasons 1 and 2 and just doing that as a group and then talking through it. Going to see the movie Candyman and talking about, again, to the point of what I was just talking about, the history of Black pain in cinema, but then also what happens when you own it and then create from the same tableau. And so these things are all really neat opportunities to just have fun because the students led it. And so that's what I would also ask for you as you're thinking about any of these programs, you're thinking about representation, you're thinking about putting anything together. Are the students in? Because if it's just all of us as academics and that's not going to work. That's not going to really get it going. And make sure the honest truth is, if they're involved, there's going to be impetus for movement. And as there's movement, there's going to be impetus for evolving. And that leads to even more things. And so the more you can do that, the easier it becomes, not just a month, but a mindset for anything you're doing. It doesn't have to be just quote unquote Black History Month. Whatever you're doing to bring diversity, equity, and inclusion more so into your university, the more you have those students and the student buy-in coupled with that logistical side and articulating to them what you're trying to do, the why. If you can sell them on the why, you can get them on the how and the when. And so with that, I'm going to take a minute and see if you have any questions, comments. I'd like this to be more of a discussion because I have more things I can talk about, but that's kind of the main foci I wanted to kind of start our chat.
So we'll just give people a second, see if they want to put any questions in either the chat or the Q&A. I will reassure you, Rich, we do have Larping in the UK. I remember my first job in higher education was at the University of Birmingham, and every Wednesday in the afternoon, you just hear the shouts and grunts as they would be doing LARPing. Tends to be more medieval and like reenacting battles from history over here. But yeah, no, we do have a LARPing scene over here in the UK. Does anybody have any questions for Rich? Well, people can be quiet. Let me check the Q&A. No questions there. I think you can carry on, Rich. I don't think you have any questions at this point.
Okay, so the one thing I do want to follow up with then, and like I mentioned, I have some articles and some suggestions from more of a staff and faculty side. I'm going to see if I can bring up on the side here as I talk through it, our university action plan for being in a more diverse environment and how that helps with providing this throughout the month. I mentioned the training. One of the keys was recruiting and training staff as restorative justice mediators to respond to bias incidents. Because as we've gone through, particularly with the pandemic and with using Zoom and some of these other telecommunicative features, we've run into the issue of folks running into microaggressions. I mentioned one of the bigger issues, with the registration system. Sometimes folks who may have transitioned having their dead name as their Zoom name. And that might, again, little thing, big thing. It might have seemed as, okay, it's not a big deal. You can change your name. But if that's a default and you constantly have to keep doing it, it's just one little thing that keeps leading to a big thing. Another that I wanted to talk about was, I mentioned the story of with the Larping, the police officer. And so we're trying to, as a community, to work with our Pitt police because they're local police, that their area of purview is our university. And so one of the big things that came onto my desk when I first got hired in this position was the Black fraternities and sororities had to pay for more of a police presence at parties or dances than the white organizations. And so if we just did a little thing, the university, which was the university stepping in and saying, we're going to now help defray the cost of security. Any student group that has hosting ability and the host doesn't ask specifically for police, we can get our local security and have the university offset that. And then there will be expectations for both security guards and police officers that we've now outlined and articulated to ensure that they know this is the lines you stay in terms of being a more inclusive, more inclusive and more customer friendly, because it shouldn't be antagonistic. It shouldn't be treated as if you're dealing with a combatant. It should be just a student that needs you to help because maybe they're collecting money, maybe they're raising money and they just want to make sure no one can run off with it, etc. We're also going to have 2 informal events to build relationships between Pitt students and police officers, which is ongoing. And then finally, at least 1 town hall for Black student representatives to ask questions of the police about maybe incidences that have occurred or things they may have heard amongst the student body, read it. I don't know, again, you all can jump in, but we try to monitor Reddit and things of that nature in terms of maybe what are issues students have provided. And it's a lot. Some of it, just like with anything in life, is going to just be someone anonymously throwing a Molotov and just seeing where it lands. Others are genuine concerns that have kind of bubbled up to the fore. And how do we address them? How do we assist and make sure our students are being heard? In terms of programs, though, one of the easiest things I can think of is when you have town halls like this, when you have meetings with folks like myself, or you bring in speakers, I think one of the fun things would be just to see how many of your students are willing to do this, because I think hearing from them will go a long way. Every year in February, we have what we call the Panther Leadership Summit, and we bring in speakers almost like a TEDx style. So you come in, you speak to 5 to 7 minutes, 12 to 15 minutes, etc. And what I opened up about 3 years ago was we'd started bringing in students. I had one student, Anashe, who started an organization called Treasure Her, which provided feminine hygiene products to homeless women. So she started it in high school. She brought it as a nonprofit from DC, Washington, DC, to Pittsburgh and continued it throughout the 4 years she was here. That is amazing. I thought it would be great to hear from her in addition to some of those alumni, staff, luminaries, big speakers, because that would again bring that home that our students are doing work. And I think same thing here. If you have any opportunities where you have speaker panels and you do have particularly strong students, I would have them come out, present, and just talk about what was the need they saw, why they brought it. And that's just such an easy way from an inclusion standpoint. just such an easy, like literal inclusion, not just, the ideas of the diversity, equity, inclusion, but bringing the students in. Like I say, I stand by that. The more you bring them in, I do that with my players. If I'm calling a football play, I try to teach them why I'm doing it. So that way, when they bring me feedback, it isn't just teacher student, it's collaboration. I'm trying to teach them something, absolutely. But if they see something I don't want to have a blind spot.
We have a question in the chat, Rich, which is, do you think the challenges facing Black men in USA are similar to the UK?
I don't want to speak with ignorance because I don't particularly know all of what Black men in the UK have to face, but I do know there are some common factors. The imposter syndrome, and again, I have some of the scholarly works that talk about that in terms of working in higher education, going to college, the stresses of not being the angry Black man in a situation. Those are universal. I saw, I'm a soccer fan. I'm an Arsenal supporter, and seeing what happened at Euros and the abuse, and then the reaction and the support for folks like Saka and Rashford, that's huge. And that's, again, the sporting. We do share that. The idea of sometimes in society there is an acceptance of the Black man as part of sport, but then denying the other parts of his agency. I mean, I just saw Ole Gunnar Solskjaer had to retract statements where he said that Rashford has to work on his priorities. And those little things, when you're saying for him, football isn't a priority, and these outside things, which to him are just as essential as playing football, if not more so. So yeah, I think some of those are similar, but I can't with certitude talk, but maybe we can discuss, like, what are some things that are being seen amongst our Black men in the UK?
I thought that was a really interesting question. I said, if anybody has any other questions to ask, please post them in the chat. I think the one I would add is, obviously, as not a Black man, so take this with a pinch of salt, but if you look at the statistics, one of the things that is undercounted when you compare directly to America is the issue of police brutality, because our police don't have guns, typically, so you don't have the issue of lethal shootings to the same extent as America. But that does not mean that you don't have the issue of police treating Black men and Black people in generally more harshly than other ethnic groups. But yes, so I think it'd be fair to say there are definitely similarities. It's actually interesting. I can't remember whereabouts in the West Midlands, but it's not far from Wolverhampton. Malcolm X actually visited in the 60s, which was actually one of the kind of kickstarting moments for the British civil rights movement that led to our Race Relations Act later in the 60s. So there's always been that link between America and Britain, and that kind of Black British people and more widely race equality advocates look into America for inspiration.
That's tough. That is a real tough one, because, like you said, the underreporting. Oh, Smethwick. Okay. The underreporting.
So just one quick, very quick. So Smethwick is interesting. So the reason why he visited was that there had been in 1964 a very aggressively racist campaign against the local Labour MP, Patrick Gordon Walker, who was going to be Foreign Secretary in the incoming Labour government, and the Conservative candidate won with explicitly racist campaigning, talking about, do you want a Black person for a neighbour, but using slurs, and it was obviously it was a national outcry. The new Prime Minister condemning it, the calling for the victorious candidate to be turned into a parliamentary leper because he had won with racist candidates, won with racist tactics. So it was a big thing. And then obviously, a few years later in the Wolverhampton area, you then have Enoch Powell talking, who was like he was the poster child, the firebrand for overt racism in British society for literally 20, 30 years. Like, I remember when I was a child, you would hear from racist white people on the market the local market my dad had a stall on, who was still in the 90s, 30 years after this guy's frontline career in politics ended, say Enoch Powell's right. And so actually the West Midlands had a very troubled history of race relations, which it has to a certain extent put behind it through a lot of work from the local council and community.
Wow. That is, I mean, it makes me think about one of the articles for this I'll be sharing at the end was talking about the idea of not just the burnout, but in this pandemic, the last year and a half, specifically people losing jobs, getting new jobs, and then, you're trying to find the cultural fit and doing that when you haven't been in your physical space in a year. And then that leads to a lot of staff and faculty, just like the students, feeling like they're first year students, trying to ask questions. And so this is a good opportunity, like even in this chat we're having now, ask these questions. Like if there's something that you have in terms of like, what are negotiables? What are non-negotiables? Think about those as you're thinking about these sorts of programs, as you think about the chat we're having, because the more you do that, the easier it'll be for you, not only here in your current position, but elsewhere, because one of the authors mentioned keeping their cup full, maintaining the energy to go through all this. And I could imagine, diving in and having this conversation today is not an easy one, but it is one that is necessary and one that I'm happy to continue to do, because I know there's a purpose behind it. And I think that's with any of us with these jobs, finding that purpose. Will, when you were talking about that with the politics, it's very easy. It's very easy for folks to kind of just fall into, oh, this is for someone else. Even things like my wife is, she's an attorney here in the States, here in Pittsburgh in particular. And she also works on we break down in like, I'm sure you do as well, but we have townships. So she's on our township council for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so one of the things she and her crew have been charged with over the last, I think she has a 5-year appointment, is bringing these sorts of thinkings to maybe sometimes a group that never thought they needed it. And so for us, it was easy. Like Black History Month in Ross Township was easy. Black History, doing anything, but bringing a diagram on the history of LGBTQIA rights in the United States was something that was kind of like, this is the first time they've ever done it. So it was like a walking tour. So it's like finding those pressure points of where people are still not, like you were saying, the ignorance is intentional, and pushing it. And the more you can do that, the more you have to have the energy for it, to be honest. I mean, I can't lie to you that this, if anyone's in this chat right now, this isn't easy, but it's doing that and doing it in ways that you can balance, keeping that cup full, keeping that energy going. That's what's going to make the difference.
I agree entirely. I don't think we got any more questions, so you can carry on, Rich. We've got about 15 more minutes left. So
okay.
Yeah.
So
to you.
yes, thank you, Will. And so one of the things, and then I'm going to cheat a little bit, and I'm going to close out, I'm going to give a couple of examples from football in terms of like keeping this going, because the one thing I've taken from my time in student affairs, working with diversity, equity, and inclusion, and trying to be mentor and teacher, is that this stuff doesn't leave just the university grounds. So for me, as Will mentioned, I am an American football coach. I coach a high school. I've coached at several high schools over the last 15 years. And one of my goals is always to provide an example of, you don't have to worry about college. Worry about now. Like a lot of times students think, I got to get recruited, I got to get signed, if I don't, this, that, and the third. No, worry about now. If you're good enough, someone will find you. Technology's there. On the other side, talking to them about these sorts of issues. We had racial unrest, we had the police brutality, we had extrajudicial murders, we had protests and riots and fake riots and people just becoming vigilantes and murdering folks, and it just was a mess. And so with COVID, I didn't coach. So I didn't coach for 2 years. This is my first year back. So coming back and meeting these kids, and has been a blessing. Dealing with, the questions of the day, the usage of the N-word during practice or in a game amongst Black players towards each other. And, navigating and explaining to my coaching colleagues that, as a Black man, they can control it. Obviously, as a coach, you want to legislate, there's certain words a referee will hear, you'll get kicked out of the game regardless of who said them. But making sure that there's an understanding. And I think that's something I've been really proud of seeing with the football players, with the coaches. Like, there's an understanding. There isn't just well, I don't want to do this, or, well, this doesn't happen, or, going something as simple as, we have a Black Lives Matter mural, and being able to talk about the history of that and that being created. Actually, if you on Twitter, at Rich_Fann, Fann, I have that as my background. And it's just a lovely, lovely image. And it, for some folks, some parents might not be that excited by it, but I explain it. I don't hide who I am. I don't hide what I do. And even, navigating, trying to be as respectful as I can, coaching a team whose name can be seen by folks of Indigenous descent as offensive. It's North Hills Indians. And so being respectful in my spaces, like, I try to wear my North Hills apparel, but I try not to wear, when I can, anything that has that on there, because I, as an employee of the University of Pittsburgh and as an employee of North Hills School District, I don't want any of our Native Americans, Indigenous Americans to feel like they are in any way put out by me, that I'm not living what I'm trying to work, if that makes sense. And I think that's big. I don't ever want to be in a position where we just had here in the United States, John Gruden, American football coach, has preached for years how much he's tolerant and bringing everyone in. And then you read his emails and it's filled with bigotry, ignorance, and just hate. And I take coach, I take teacher, I take working at my alma mater as one of the highest forms of honor. And so I never want to dishonor any of that by not bringing what I am and who I am to what I do. And so from a standpoint of working with our students, that makes things tough because as you all know, you can't always tell the whole story. There are people above, people below, people in the middle, but there's also stuff that you don't necessarily get to share because as an administrator, there are certain things you're not allowed to reveal. And so working through that, like I said, that's the logistical part for me. I can sit down and I can be honest to a fault with a student, but if there's something I know I can't talk about, I'm just going to say that's something I can't talk about right now and go from there. I saw that there was a question.
Yeah, so the question is, what are the implications for education leaders? So I think we take that. I assume that's in general about what you've been talking about, but what do you think are the implications for education leaders? If the person who asked the question wants to clarify if there's a particular thing, we can. I think they have. 1 second. No. So yes, I think it's in general. What are the implications for education leaders?
I think the implications is listening and being willing to hear the feedback, because I think one of the issues, for instance, when I was in the Career Center at Pitt and I work with students, one of the first things I would tell them is, if you had the interview question of tell me about a difficult person you worked with, you absolutely should not say it was a professor who you couldn't understand because English wasn't their first language, because you're already showing a level of ignorance and laziness on your part that is going to carry into your job. And so on the other side, as a professor, as an academic, I would say, make sure you're listening to your students. And if there are things that are going on, for instance, we get a lot of like the microaggressions I mentioned, particularly with our trans community, of using the dead name. But the biggest thing I've always found is asking a student what their name is and sticking to it. In terms of just teaching and the curricula and the responsibility or dangers therein, I think the biggest issue right now is trying to explain to folks that there are certain, and especially in a collegiate environment, there's certain debatable points. We can debate anything as long as the day go around, but then there are certain things that are absolute non-negotiables, and treating them as a thought exercise is both insulting to the person being discussed, of the persons, as well as the higher educational goals of debate, dialogue, etc. And so I would just challenge for the person who asked the question, if there's something that's standing out that is particularly difficult, if you could be more specific, I think that would help. so that way we can kind of flesh it out.
Well, I'll just add to that. I think one of the things that when you're listening to students that can be difficult for us to remember is that we are older than them and they are at the cutting edge of evolving social attitudes. And I think sometimes some of the feedback we get from staff members, you almost feel a bit of, I don't want to say exhaustion, but almost like bafflement as things are changing rapidly. But that's just natural. That's the way we improve and we grow. And I was watching a fantastic documentary at the weekend that Sky Sports had produced about black players in English cricket. And there was a famous black British cricketer called Devon Malcolm, who was talking about he just met up with a former teammate for because they're friends. And the white teammate had gone to him, like, I cannot believe what we used to say to you, we the white players used to say to you under the auspices of banter. I'd be horrified if my children spoke to your children the way we used to speak to you. And, and like, I'm sorry we did that back 20 years ago. And like, the thing is, Devon Malcolm was saying, like, he was hurt by those comments. He wasn't happy about them, but he felt he had to kind of laugh it off, not react, play along. And so sometimes things are changing, and maybe something that you could have done with a friend 20 years ago, or a joke you could have made 5 years ago, you're suddenly not allowed to do. But that's good. That's progress, because actually those things were never okay. Just that the people who you were hurting didn't have the power to challenge you at that point, and thought it better to let things slide.
Yeah, I think to your point, Will, what I was thinking about was the I mentioned sport, I mentioned the Gruden situation, but also just the idea of people, sometimes folks pushing back on the idea of what microaggressions are, and not understanding truly what they can, how they, again, little thing. I'm always big, little things, big things. So hearing you speak so well, I heard that a lot in college. I heard that a lot in high school. Like, you speak so well, or you're one of the good ones. When I moved from, a very ethnically diverse Brooklyn, New York, to a very monotonous Pocono Mountains, which is like Eastern Pennsylvania. One of the good ones, or, they wouldn't use a slur, but it's like those guys, those people, you're not like one of them. And that sort of thing pervades. And then when they get older, I had a number. This pandemic has been, if anything, wonderful for folks. As stressful as it has been, and I mentioned that for us and our students, it also has been a wonderful opportunity for folks to have some introspection. I had someone who I had dated in high school and going into college send a note to me saying, I'm sorry I didn't push back when my parents would say some things behind your back. And it's like, well, I didn't know, and thank you. But I got why she did what she did. It was because they wanted to kind of have that reckoning as they raise children and think about what world do they want to be in. And I think a lot of it, like Will was saying, it's evolution. Or the Chappelle, I think about the Chappelle stand-up. A lot of the backlash what he's facing here in the United States is because he's punching down by coming out and saying, I am a hardcore turf. You've now thrown a flag up that is, and then the jokes being made are now setting a line in the sand that are excluding people. Most good comedians, you think of a George Carlin, you think of do you all consider Lenny Bruce a good comedian?
I've never heard of him.
I don't know okay.
But I mean, the thing I would say with the Chubb, I've not watched it yet. I've seen the kind of breakdown, and I've read articles about it. It's the thing I was talking about. He's hiding behind a trans friend of his.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, okay, and even if that trans person was okay with Chappelle's jokes, but not every trans person is, not most trans people are. So you can't just say, I don't have to do what you're telling me to do or you're asking me to do, because actually I have found one person in your demographic group that says what I'm doing is okay. No, it's more complicated. Well, it's actually not more complicated than that. It's more simple than that. There are ways to actually to understand and listen to people properly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think of the same with anytime something occurs, again, with the John Gruden situation, you had, and again, for those of you who aren't American sports fans, I apologize. I'll try to find something that's a little bit more of a solid example, but you had a Hall of Fame coach and player come out that Sunday and talk about how they knew him. And those words weren't necessarily who he was, but then a few days later, even more emails came out. And so you, as these Black luminaries in your sport, tried to lend cover to this man, and he made you look like a fool because more evidence came out that the version of what you saw is not the person he was showing everyone else. And so that, I think going back to the question about academics, that's the thing. Be who you are all the time. That's easier than turning something on or off, because if anything, we found in the last few years, as folks grow and develop, sometimes there is a need for, evolution, like Will's talking about, but also there's sometimes where there's going to be a disingenuous challenge. And I think that's what you also have to be prepared for, where someone's bringing something to your attention, not that in the intention of you fixing it, but because they think that's going to dissuade you or exclude you from the conversation.
I mean, that's a really good point, Rich. Is there a final question from anybody? If not, we will wrap things up there. I don't see anything coming in. So big thank you again, Rich. It's always great to have you speaking to us. Final remarks from you, and where can people find you?
Sure, absolutely. If you'd like to, I was going to try to share it in the chat, so I may unshare. I'm going to stop sharing right now. So I'm going to send this giant thing to you all. You can find me on email at the University of Pittsburgh. My email is rfann@pitt.edu. I'll throw it in the chat right now. And then additionally, I'm going to throw in some of my works cited just to kind of give you an idea of what I was reading and what I've been reading, what I read, because I think that's helpful to inform these sorts of conversations too. And I had like more of an outline, not like a necessarily script. I'm not much of a script guy, as Will knows. So those are articles for the group. You can take a look at those. They talk about burnout. They talk about racial unrest and COVID as professionals. There was one from the APA. I thought that was particularly important in terms of how one deals with the stressors of the day in this current environment and still persist in the position they're doing. But yeah, so go ahead, Will. Thank you for your time. You can, if you want to follow me on Twitter, I'm at Rich_Fann, Fann. I'm typically talking about sports, wrestling, life, probably silliness like Titans on HBO Max, whatever I can do to get peace. And then also, anytime you'd like me to chat more one-on-one, I'm happy to do it. I mentioned that to one of the folks who asked the question, but I have been able to do it and have some great collegial conversations with some of the other folks that had took the time to chat with me after, and then even start participating in some of our programs virtually across the pond. So thank you all for your time. Thank you for your energy. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your afternoon.
Big thank you again, Rick. It's always great when you come and speak. And as I said, everybody, we have more Black History Month events coming up, including tomorrow, where we have the Racial Awareness Seminar. We are sponsoring, that's being delivered by Patrick Vernon OBE at Shropshire Council, with a panel following that will include our own racial equality leads, Grinda Singh. That is starting at 2 p.m. And then we have a special presentation from the Bentley Cards BAME staff network, which will take place at 12 p.m. on Thursday. Just think we're having an issue with the chat, so I'm just going to try and set. No, it's gone to everybody, I think. So if people haven't got the list from Rich, I've made a copy of it, so we'll email that round to people as well. Thank you again, everybody.